making his way to Sacramento to call the Nuggets and Kings on Wednesday night on ESPN, fresh back from the national championship game, making his way from one spot to another. Jay Bilas. Good to see you, Jay. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you, Rich.
Good to see you.
Great to see you always.
So, this is a tradition unlike any other. You're kind enough to join us the very day after Nets get cut. Let's just jump right into it and just the macro question as to why you think Florida cut down the Nets in this tournament.
I do think they were the best team. From probably the middle of the season on, Florida had a different look to them as a team with their size up front and depth, and then great guards. And they've got Walter Clayton Jr., who can score. He's an on-demand scorer. He can make challenge shots, and when things break down, he can just take over. And he had a Kemba Walker-like tournament. He might not have had his best game in the final, but when he was held scoreless in the first half, but came back in the second half, had 11. He had 7 assists in the game and made some of the bigger defensive plays, especially the last one. But Florida played in the toughest league in the SEC, and I thought they emerged as the best team. But Houston and Duke were formidable. But Florida pushed everybody back. And even when they had their backs against the wall in a number of games, they executed down the stretch, mostly because of Clayton. I mean, they beat Auburn in the semis just because they had Walter Clayton Jr. and nobody else did. But I think it was more of a total team effort in the game against Houston. And that was the first time, Rich, Houston, when they hold their opponents under 70, they are 30-0. And this is the first time all year that an opponent had scored under 70 points and won. And Florida was that opponent. They did it with defense. They were, in the second half, they were really fantastic defensively. And that was the way they did it against Auburn, too.
Yeah, and then obviously the defense on the final possession of the game. You've seen a ton of basketball, Jay. Have you ever seen a game of this magnitude end like that, where guy goes in the air, gives himself up, and knows if I touch this basketball, there's a violation and we lose the game? And I've never seen anything like that in my life.
I've certainly seen the play before where that happens, but I've never seen it on a final play where where the shooter, after they sort of drop the ball because they know if they come down with it, they're going to get called for travel. And Emmanuel Sharp knew he couldn't pick it up. In retrospect, he probably would have been better off just picking it up. Yeah. The clock stops, and maybe they can get a 5-second call or a steal or something. But, it was really unusual. And I know for Kelvin Sampson, it's probably the last 4 possessions, not getting a shot. When you don't get a shot up and you turn it over, certainly, you don't get a chance for an offensive rebound. You don't get a chance to get fouled. And I think the disappointing thing is they were only down 2 points, and both teams were in the double bonus. I thought they were going to try to drive it and get into the paint, and then if you draw help and in a rotation, you can kick it out for an open 3. But you have to give credit to Florida. I mean, Houston started that out on the right side of the floor, and Florida switched out. Thomas Houck did a great job on a switch and stopping the ball, and they limited L.J. Cryer. They wouldn't let him get it back on a little rescreen action where he's coming back to the ball, and they wound up getting it to Emmanuel Sharp in their third option of that play. And it was just a great closeout by Walter Clayton Jr. Yeah. What you would hope in that was that Sharp would have shot faked and then drive, because if you shot fake in that situation, the defense is more than likely going to go for it. But he went up for the shot, and Clayton took it away from him. It was just really good defense. Yeah, they were terrific. The defense, as you point out, Jay Bilas, and it's amazing how last year they're one and done, giving up triple digits to Colorado in getting bounced, and now here they were the only team to win 6 games in this tournament. And the defense, you got to give Coach Golden some credit here for remaking, right? That's really a good point, because last year when they lost to Colorado, they were probably ranked in the 90s nationally in defensive efficiency. But, that's kind of the value of having players that you get to come back. Florida didn't have a lot of 5-star recruits out of high school. A lot of these guys were under-recruited. Walter Clayton Jr. was a football player, and he was heavily recruited as a free safety by Florida and by Alabama, by Georgia, other big shot football programs. But he wanted to play basketball, so he went to Iona and he played for Rick Pitino for 2 years, and he was a MAC Player of the Year at Iona, and then transferred to Florida to play for Todd Golden. But Elijah Martin played at Florida Atlantic. There were a bunch of guys that weren't, sort of your top 50, top 30 recruits. And I think the same thing went for Houston. Houston had maybe some higher valued high school recruits, but, not your McDonald's All-American types. And that's why I thought, before the tournament started that Houston was going to beat Duke, because Houston has, they were older, certainly in spots, but they played in close games all year long. They live in those games. And Duke didn't. Duke had the highest margin of victory in the tournament, and they don't play in any close games. And so how were they going to behave when the game was on the line? And it turned out that was a deciding factor. If they had done a few things better, still could have, arguably should have won. But, not being in that fire time and time again, because you look back on some of the great teams of the past, they were all challenged. And Houston and Florida, they were challenged game in, game out in their leagues, and Duke wasn't. That's not an excuse, but it was pointed out before the game by a lot of us saying, "Hey, this could be a real factor," and it turned out that it was.
Oh, on the subject of Houston and Duke, Jay, I got to ask: was that a proper call of an over the back on Cooper Flagg that wound up giving free throws to Houston to take a lead?
Yeah, it was a foul. It was a foul. But what I would say, Rich, is in that game, it probably wasn't. That was more of a hockey game. And so that's sort of the thing with officiating, when you let something go for 39 minutes and then you call it there. And I have a little bit of a different take. I think the officials should be more vigilant in calling physical contact on cutters and on players with the ball. Physicality on rebounding, I'm okay with. I think that's where you let a little more go. Let them be physical when they're rebounding. But do I think the call was correct? Yes, I do, by the rule book. But I can show you a bunch of other plays in that game where there was way more contact on rebounds in an over the back situation. There was no call made. So you can kind of argue it both ways, but that's not that was one of the important plays in that game, but it wasn't the only one. There were a litany of plays you could go down toward the end of that game where Duke didn't handle it very well and Houston did. So Houston took it from them. I mean, I guess there's no great comeback without a corresponding collapse by the other team. But I really do think the sharpness of not having been in close games was a factor in Duke not being able to execute down the stretch when there was real game pressure on in a really big game.
What do you think the postmortem in John Shire's office is right now, Jay?
The postmortem, I think John's really smart. So I think they're going to look at it for what it is. They didn't execute when they had to. And you look at, well, how do we do this better in the future? The problem is none of those players are going to be there next year. So one of the things that factored into that game was Houston lost to Duke last year in the Sweet 16 when Jamal Shedd got injured in the first half of that game, didn't play in the second half. They were lost by 2 points. I think it was 54-52, if I remember right. I thought Houston was a better team. But all those guys came back, and they had some new players added, but they all came back. So they all had that sort of, what would you call it, institutional memory of that. And that's how a lot of great teams operate. They benefit from the times they've fallen short, and they've been in the fire, and they move forward in a positive way. Duke doesn't have that luxury because their team changes just about every year. So, you could argue, well, what's the better approach? Do you get, quote unquote, lesser recruits and keep them for longer so that they can develop together? And maybe you're tougher and stronger and older, or do you go for the super talent? Because I think, there were probably 358 teams that would have traded places with Duke. They only lost 4 games on the season. So they were legit and certainly could have won that game. They just didn't. But only one team cuts the nets down. It was Florida, but I think John will handle it positively. It's a crushing blow, obviously, but he's a competitor, and true competitors know that they can go into a game and lose, and they handle it the right way, and he's one of those guys.
Before I let you go, let's talk about the 2 teams you're going to see on Wednesday night calling on ESPN. Kings coming off of a big win in Detroit with DeRozan and Levine combining for 80, and it looks like, the best case scenario for the Kings is to be the 9 seed in the play-in scenario. And then you got the Nuggets with Jokic playing all world. And then we'll find out, I guess, where they're seated and who they play in a Western Conference that appears to be Oklahoma's cities to take. I'm wondering where you stand on the way the Western Conference is shaking out before you head off there.
The Western Conference is ridiculously good. And when you're looking at teams 3 through 8 that are basically separated by 1.5 games in the standings, these last few games that are played on the schedule are going to be really important for seeding in the playoffs. And for Sacramento, I mean, it's not just that win they had at Detroit, which was really impressive, but they also beat Cleveland right before that. They're playing at a really high level. And it's not just DeRozan and Levine. I mean, Domantas Sabonis has been, for the last few years, one of the best players in the league. I mean, he's been a double-double machine. So there's a lot on the line for this one, for Sacramento to get into the play-in and make sure they solidify that, and for Denver to make sure they stay out of that. But Denver hasn't had Jamal Murray for like 5 games. And he's had that hamstring, which I think Michael Malone said, look, we're not being careful. He's hurt. Like, careful is when you hold a guy out when you're in good shape and in the play. They have a sense of urgency here because it's not a good position for them to be in the play-in when they could easily be the 3 or the 4 seed if they had handled things a little bit better. But I think for Denver, their defense is the biggest concern. Turnovers and defense, and that's going to be the concern when they play Sacramento. And
then everybody who doesn't make the playoffs puts their Cooper Flagg hope chest out. Is that basically what it is, Jay?
Pretty much. But there are a lot of good players in this draft, whether it's Dylan Harper of Rutgers, Ace Bailey of Rutgers, VJ Edgecombe at Baylor. I don't know exactly where this draft ranks, but it smells a little bit like the draft we had in 2003. But there's a lot. There's a lot in this draft beyond Cooper Flagg. He's just the ultimate prize, and I think he's going to be in the draft. People are saying, is he going to come back? And I'm like, he'll come back to collect his stuff, but he's not coming back.
Well, we saw he collected his golf clubs the other day. He's already at the range, just I guess working out his disappointment. And then I guess the last one for you is, who was the best pro prospect we saw last night on the court?
That's a good question. I would probably say Walter Clayton Jr. I think he's a first-round draft pick, but Alex Condon is going to play in the NBA. I think Thomas Houck will, and I think there's a good chance that Elijah Martin does as well. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Will Richard make a roster. Like, those guys are good guards, but Clayton's special. Even though he's small, he's special. Like, he makes incredibly difficult shots, and I think your whole body of work is what people should be relying on. Any scout or front office person, but his performance in the tournament certainly didn't hurt. It was kind of a force multiplier to say, hey, I've been doing this all year long, but when you saw it with the lights on, that was confirmation.
Yeah, man, and then not just the lights on, like when the clock's ticking down. Right. I mean, yeah. Listen, Richard was shooting threes to keep Florida in the game when they're turning it over and they're not getting any shots. Houston was smothering them last night in the first half, and Richard was doing what needed to be done because Clayton Jr. Had no points. That said, I thought that you can make a case that was his most impressive game, with Clayton Jr. scoring 11 with 7 assists when he could have gone in the tank. He could have circled the drain last night. And he didn't, and he was needed.
Yeah, I think that's right, Rich. Like, he's got a clutch gene in him that most players just don't have. And when he's being smothered, he's got an extra gear to get through. Like, he can split traps and great in transition, all that stuff. But his ability to make challenge shots and be a creative finisher around the basket, you don't see guys like him very often. And the thing that has really impressed me was how much his defense has improved from last year to this year. I wouldn't have called him a defender last year, but this year he guards, and it just shows like his ceiling is higher. So I don't doubt he's going to play in the NBA for a long time if he stays healthy.
Jay, you're the best, man. Thanks for keeping this tradition alive. It means a lot that you take the time. And we got 2 LA teams in the NBA playoffs. So if you come through here, please let me know. Love to see you.
I would love to do that. And with the Duke guy coaching the Lakers, might be a shot I can get a ticket. I don't know if he'd answer the call, though.
Were you okay with I don't know if did you watch The White Lotus, Jay? Did you see it? Did you watch
I
it?
saw some of it. My wife is addicted to it,
Okay.
but I haven't seen. I was a little busy, so
I
I haven't seen much of it. But during replay reviews in the NCAA tournament, they take so long. I could have knocked out a couple of episodes while they were looking at whether the ball touched somebody's shorts.
You could have binged it. Well, there was a character in it who there's a family from Duke that all went to Duke, and a guy whose life was crumbling because of his choices, wearing Duke stuff the entire time, and apparently Duke didn't like it. So
I have seen the meme of that with the gun to the head, and so yeah, I get it. But I think Duke's doing the right thing in protecting their trademark. I would have rather had somebody else wearing that shirt.
Well, listen, Jay, they messed with the wrong guy. You once put Barney on the stand, as we've seen here on the stage. They're messing with the wrong person. Jay, thanks for the time, man. Travel safe, and I hope to see you soon. Right back at you.
Thank you.
The great Jay Bilas from ESPN. Everybody check him out at the mic on Wednesday night in Sacramento against the Nuggets, right here on The Rich Eisen Show. Catch The Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.